Let's do a throwback clip here. This is conservative economist Milton Friedman talking to Phil Donahue about greed.
Kyle Muscandinavia Kulinski is responding to Milton Friedman. This is gonna be fucking amazing. And by fucking amazing, I mean Kyle is gonna miss the point almost entirely and more than likely either build up and tear down a straw man argument or point to a country with universal health care or some other government-run market service and falsely claim that it's a successful example while ignoring all the provable facts, both demonstrable and mathematically provable, that show that these systems are inferior to the market-operated counterparts, based entirely on the notion that they're popular, which, aside from being a blatant appeal to a popularity fallacy, is not even factually correct.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worse off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear.
Last chance, because he's about to open his face flaps. Put your wagers in now for what you think his argument's gonna be.
Yeah, that's false. Well, actually, it's true, because the record of history is crystal clear, and it's not what you say. So what's my evidence? Oh, I don't know. Scandinavia.
Oh, who am I kidding? We all knew that was going to be his response. If there is anyone in my audience who didn't vote for Muscandinavia, then you are a moron, and frankly, you didn't deserve the money you bet away anyway. Thank you for playing, everyone.
Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, Greenland, Finland. These are all places where, objectively speaking, so according to measurements and data from the UN and the World Health Organization and others, it's clear that in all relevant categories, these places kick the ass of the rest of the world.
Well, considering that you didn't provide any citations, your claim can be dismissed at face value, since the burden of proof is on you to justify your claim. Though, as I've already pointed out, countries which implement universal healthcare have abysmal healthcare with poor quality and higher cost. The reason for this being the case is because universal healthcare restricts supply of commodities available in the market, which artificially inflates the cost of commodities and therefore makes it so no competitors can enter the market. And that is if competition isn't outright outlawed, and this isn't something that you can avoid in a universal healthcare system either, since the reason supplies are limited is due to the government attempting to ration all available commodities as a result of there being no price ratios. Without a price mechanism, it doesn't matter how well-intentioned the central planners are. There will always be rationing, because without pricing commodities, there is no manner to tell what the demand or supply of a commodity is. And this same issue applies to mixed healthcare systems like Denmark or Iceland, where the government entering the market has a monopolizing effect on prices, where because the government service has no incentive to provide the best quality of service, the cost of commodities increases, and the quality declines, which also has a negative effect on the private competitors, since they all now have these regulations regulations, which increase the cost of commodities significantly, resulting in competitors shutting down or having to raise the cost of healthcare to adjust to the government's prices. And this is the same with every government commodity: healthcare, schooling, nationalizing food, no matter what. If you socialize it or have a government alternative, there will be shortages and increasing of prices. Also, can you single-payer advocates stop pointing to the U.S. as an example of privatization? The U.S. government spends more on healthcare than most examples you've provided of single-payer systems, not to mention that there's a direct correlation between the rising cost of healthcare and the passing of Medicare and Medicaid and increasing regulations onto the market. So, clearly, our problems are because of the government.
So, for example, their healthcare systems, they're much better than the rest of the world. Okay, especially better than the United States, because we don't even have a single-payer system. So they have socialist healthcare systems, wildly successful. They also have better education systems.
Outright false. There's a direct decline in literacy rates in correlation with how heavily the government is involved in the economy.
They also have universal daycare, which is awesome. And that's an idea that hasn't even crossed the mind of people in the United States of America.
Perhaps because people who see the problem with every other government service don't want an unaccountable nationalized bureaucracy taking care of their fucking children. Could you imagine what a nationalized daycare would be like? Well, we don't need to because we have examples of it, and it's basically exactly what you'd expect.
They also have better social safety nets. So if you fall on hard times, don't worry. The taxpayers in the state are going to give you a temporary boost and let you know you're not going to starve in the street.
Except that's not true, because countries with freer markets have on average a lower duration of unemployment between jobs and higher workforce participation. All government welfare does is incentivize people not to work. How do I know this? Because with the welfare system, the majority of people receiving subsidies are work eligible, and we know that this is a result of government welfare itself and not some unseen variable, because when welfare budgets are cut or when the requirements to receive welfare are narrowed, employment drastically increases. As for the people who are genuinely disadvantaged, they can be provided for voluntarily in a free market charity. And yes, voluntary private social spending is also higher in freer market economies.
Even when you work in the United States, a living wage is not the minimum wage. The minimum wage is less than a living wage, so you can work full-time and still live in poverty, still not be able to pay the bills.
Well, Kyle Kulinski, who determines those wages if the free market can't determine them? Some asshat politician? Is that what you want? Oh yeah, that's what you want. Guess what? Leaving it up to a board of idiots to decide the wages, be it the government, is retarded, because they'll never know the actual experiences of business owners and workers. You'll never have that. They'll just up the wage up too much, or they'll tank the wages down. So your idea of, oh yeah, let's have the government decide it, man, it's bullshit. And by the way, in Scandinavian countries, a number of which don't even have minimum wage laws, and they're doing perfectly fine. They have no such thing as a living wage, as you call it, and they're doing pretty fine in those areas.
Like it or not, Kyle, minimum wage laws kill jobs or increase the price of commodities. See, wages in a market are determined by the equilibrium of the supply and demand curves. Increasing the minimum wage causes the cost of employing laborers to increase, meaning that companies can't afford to hire as many laborers because each laborer costs more, and as a result they need to either lay people off or increase the price of their commodities since they're spending more on employees. And generally, all three of the aforementioned problems occur because big corporations are the only companies left in areas with high minimum wages, and they can afford to do whatever they want since they experience virtually no competition, and therefore the forces of the market don't apply to them. And due to market competition in freer markets, wages are significantly higher, and the quality of services as well, since private employers will do as much as they can to incentivize employees to work for them over their competitors. This is why prior to minimum wage laws in the United States, Ford was paying their workers what would be the equivalent of $30 an hour today and giving them full benefits as a condition of being employed. Or, to put it more simply, calling it minimum wage is disingenuous because what it really is institutionalized unemployment. And you want to know what the really fucked up thing about minimum wage is? Every time advocates for it get their way and the minimum wage increases, they blame the market on the failings of what was really caused by the government and ask them to increase the minimum wage again.
How fucking crazy is that? So he's wrong. Now here's the reality. It's mixed. So what he's saying is somewhat true and somewhat false. So capitalism in general, is it a good thing? Well, it depends. In what area are we talking about having the free market and having capitalism? If you're talking about consumer goods, you're talking about making video games or making the coolest, most comfortable couch or making lamps or making, DVRs or whatever, things that, are consumer goods. In that case, I'm all for capitalism, man. Do you want to talk about the coolest t-shirt, the best fashion? By all means, the capitalist system all day long. I don't want my tax dollars funding something like that. That's something that's specifically for capitalism. So yeah, what you're saying is partly true, because some areas capitalism is necessary. In other areas, it's not. In other areas, you need government. You need socialism.
Why? The government produces nothing and can only redistribute commodities produced by the private sector, and left alone, the free market produces higher quality products at a lower price. There is no economic or objective need for the government other than you being an authoritarian and thinking that stealing from others is okay if their money goes to force people into providing services you think people shouldn't be able to provide for themselves. You and all other social democrats are just authoritarians who hide behind the guise of benevolence and emotional pleas to push systems that increase the cost of commodities and lower the quality of living, then deny the facts to claim that it's the fault of the market to make the government expand its influence in the market. I actually fucking despise social democracy, and that's not something that I throw around lightly.
You do not need government. You do not need socialism to drive a society, Kyle. You do not. Guess what? Have you ever heard of anarcho-capitalism? The concept of the free market being implemented to its fullest potential and that the industry can self-regulate itself? Have you? And guess what? The free market is a better system overall. If you want the best healthcare, if you want the best, best care in the world, guess what? Capitalism will serve that need because government cannot efficiently distribute resources to its people. That is why there's lots of corruption, bureaucracy, and horrible things that go on with government. Government in general, you do not trust capitalism. You think that, people are too greedy, they'll abuse the system, the capitalist pig horses, socialism all day long. Well, why do you trust the same type of species, humans, to decide it if you think humans are evil? What makes a group of people less evil than one individual person who may be pursuing a private wealth and free market? How do you determine that that group of people is morally justified and that one person over there is evil and should not be trusted? That system of the free market should not be trusted. It's bullshit what you're saying. To be honest, government is not needed in our society, and it would be a hell of a lot better if they got the hell out of our lives, our social lives, what we believe, and let the people decide how we should go about these things. And guess what? As long as the society follows the non-aggression principle, it beats government all day long.
See, the reality is nuanced and complex and mixed. It's not all one thing or all another thing.
Yes, it fucking is, Kyle. I can literally prove mathematically that freer markets are better than regulated markets. And in order for a market to not be a free market, it has to be government regulated. If it's government regulated, it's not a free market in both function and practice. So it is literally impossible for there to be a middle ground between these two positions. So take your radical centrist bullshit and shove it up your fucking ass.
I hate when we have these conversations like this in these black and white ways. Either capitalism or not capitalism. No, that's stupid. Sometimes the answer is capitalism, sometimes it's not capitalism.
Sorry, Kyle, but facts do not care about your pathetic authoritarian feelings.
And what was that we just saw, by the way? That was the greed is good speech before the greed is good speech. And the reality is, sometimes greed is necessary and greed makes sense, but other times it's not. And it does take a village.
Do you even know of the context he's talking about greed? He's talking about self-interest. He's not talking about the stereotypical biblical greed here. He's not talking about that. He's talking about self-ambition. The idea of greed in economics is a bit different than what layman's terms is, but the concept is that there are three things that motivate economics: greed, fear, and I forgot the other thing. But basically, those two things go in to make economics. The fear of losing out, get more, that is greed. So, yeah, that's what runs economics in a sense, the principles behind it. I can't really remember how my economics teacher put it, but yeah. And the fact is, Kyle, capitalism does solve a lot of things. It does solve a majority of the problems in the world. If you want to talk about poverty, hell yeah, it solved a lot of that crap. What has socialism ever done for society? What has it done? Oh wait, it's created starvation, it's created dependence on government, and it has created a sister ideology called communism, which has killed over 90 million people. So how is socialism good again? And by the way, capitalism, it hasn't really even killed a lot of people. It hasn't. It's actually lifted more people out of poverty than socialism ever has. So you are mistaken when you say that, oh, it's nuanced and complex. Yes, it's complex, but yeah, remove socialism out of it and just implement capitalism into it. A lot of the problems will fade away. It might take time, but it will. Socialism, here's the thing. It's like the rattlesnake oil that snake oil the salesman used to sell back then. Socialism promises immediate change. Capitalism requires gradual change. It encourages gradual change. Socialism is just a pipe dream. That's all it is.
All actions made by humans in all scenarios are all inherently motivated by self-interest, whether it's working or producing commodities for yourself or to trade to obtain your living, or it's an emotional desire such as helping an old lady across the street, or it could be a social desire such as expressing your ideas online or talking with other people. Of course, you need to misrepresent what Friedman is talking about here, Kyle, because what he's saying is so self-evidently correct that you literally can't argue against it without making a performative contradiction, since in order to argue against it, you're proving his argument correct by satisfying your self-interest.
Again, it's complex, it's nuanced. It's not like he's making it seem like the answer is always capitalism and it's always free markets and it's always greed. Now, let me just answer one of his biggest claims there, and we'll wrap it up on this. But he says, well, all the great achievements have come from individuals. It's never been collectivism or the government or community. But think about how ridiculous what he just said is. See, look, again, we are nuanced, so we'll say, sure, in some cases it was individualism that led to these amazing accomplishments and these great achievements.
Alright, I'm so sick of this. Kyle, what you're doing here is known as an argument from moderation, and it's a logical fallacy which asserts that a correct position is always between two radically opposing positions and giving no reason as to why this is the case. Give me one fucking example of a time where good has come out of collectivism. Just one. Meanwhile, I can cite pretty much every example of collectivism as an example of collectivism not being good. Gee, it seems like one system here is definitely better than the other.
Sure, absolutely. But was it sometimes government? And was it sometimes the collective? Again, absolutely. So, for example, the Marshall Plan, the New Deal, which essentially saved us from the worst, gross Great Depression. There's a reason why FDR kept getting elected.
Alright, now I'm actually done. FDR put people in concentration camps because of their ethnicity. He confiscated everyone's gold during the worst depression in U.S. history. He basically fucking nationalized the economy to the point where the government was giving out rations. He kept giving surpluses to these businesses, which only prolonged the depression. And you say he was good for the economy? Alright, Executioner, you can take the rest from here.
Okay, Kyle, you're about to piss me off. Guess what? FDR did not solve the Great Depression. He did not. He worsened it. His public works programs actually created lots more debt than it was before them. Sorry for my ebonics. But guess what? He created more debt. He created these public works programs that, sure, may have put people to work, but there was little pay involved for that work. It was essentially forced labor in a way. So you claim FDR, he accomplished it, blah, blah, blah. No, we got out of the Depression because guess what? Even in World War II, we had a depression. And after World War II, private companies could actually sell things again and we didn't have to ration things. And yeah, that's how we got out of the Depression. It was only when the free market could take over. And what pisses me off about your claim is, oh, that FDR fixed the Great Depression, like his group of Democrats. No, he did not. Hoover tried the same fucking policies as a Republican, and you shit on him all the time. And the fact is, you can't just say that, oh, FDR did this is good, but this guy did it and he is bad. You know, in all of his other videos, he trashes the Republicans when the Republicans have done the same policies as the Democrats did back in the 30s. And the problem is, with you, Kyle, yourself, is that FDR actually made the Depression worse. He increased taxes, which screwed over the middle class, which was very fringe at that time because of the Depression, and poor people, increasing the amount of unemployment. So no, socialism does not work in those categories.
Because people loved him because he gave them jobs and he did redistribute wealth at a time when the wealth disparity was absurd and you had a group of billionaires that had everything and the rest of America was struggling.
No thanks to the policies of Hoover, which were the exact same as FDR, and yet you credit Hoover for causing the Depression, though really the blame for the Depression more lies with the Fed, because the Fed allowed banks to just take money and do whatever they wanted with it, and of course they invested a lot of that worthless fiat into the stock market. Yeah, I know, I said I was done. Guess I'm just a masochist.
So he said, I'm going to tax their punk asses because they didn't earn that money. And
I'm sorry? People who owned businesses didn't earn that money even though it was rightfully obtained with the property they legitimately earned? Well, fuck you, douchebag. Imagine being a worker and actually saving up the capital to start a business, only to have Kyle, you didn't earn it, Kulinski, come up to you and tell you that you didn't earn it because you have an amount of money that he doesn't like.
And we're going to give people jobs in terms of shovel-ready projects.
This is the thing that people like Kyle don't realize. Increasing jobs is not always a good thing. If the demand for labor is lower than what is necessary for the industry, you're going to get much of the same issues with the economy as with minimum wage, except you're going to have an abundance of jobs which pay little to nothing. And that's assuming that there's not also a minimum wage. If you combine a minimum wage with right-to-work legislation, then the economy is going to be completely fucked. And that's exactly what FDR did.
Create infrastructure and stop this Great Depression. So the New Deal was fantastic. The internet was created by through government dollars that went to the Pentagon. Sure, there were individuals involved in it, but a lot of it was government funding.
And before the internet was introduced as a private commodity on the market, it was a glorified radio service. If anything, the internet going from government to private hands is an example of how free market innovation works.
How about medicine? A lot of breakthroughs in medicine come from the NIH and other government-funded places. You can't, if you just had the private sector working on medicine, certain things they would never have a cure for because they think the investment is too much and it takes too long to maybe get an answer. So they just say there's not enough profit in it, I'm not going to do it.
Wrong, Kyle. Can I explain to you why? Because in all business, there is a certain amount of risk. Now, if you can say that the risk will pay off, if you can create, let's say, a cure for cancer, then guess what? If you created the cure for cancer, then you're going to be very rich because people will be willing to pay a lot of money for that cure. Now, you want to make that affordable, cheapest you can, but with the number of people having cancer, you will easily make your profit back. You will easily make your investment back in profit. So the fact is, medicine can be privatized in that way because guess what? Many medical achievements have come about through privatization of a lot of things. So your argument of, hey, we must publicize medicine because businesses are greedy and they cannot do this, blah, blah, blah. In the words of Hoodie Demon, that is why the free market has great healthcare, because of greed. You understand that? I will link that down below the video. It's Hoodie Demon's universal healthcare video. But yeah, you are totally wrong. Over to you, esoteric entity.
That's literally how innovation works, Kyle. If companies didn't innovate and didn't have the incentive to innovate, then none of the things you said were good about the free market earlier would exist, so you're just being selective. And by the way, no citation on these so-called breakthroughs which were made by the government in the medical industry. However, I can give you examples of innovation made by privatization because they're in the plenty. For example, the defibrillator used to be only able to be used by doctors because of regulation, and those regulations were removed because they were expensive, people were dying that could have easily been saved if the nurse had been able to do it, and they were harder to use. Then firefighters lobbied to have these regulations removed. Long story short, all the regulations on defibrillators, or at least the ones which restrict the use on who can and can't use them, are now gone, and as a result, they're small, about the size of a purse, easier to use, and cost thousands of times less than the older models did. Alright, well that's it for today's video. If you liked it, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you next.